The rain in Chicago doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. That night, the thunder was loud enough to drown out a gunshot, but it couldn't drown out the crying. Sophie thought it was a stray cat at first, huddled behind the dumpster of the diner where she'd just finished a 12-hour shift. She was wrong. It wasn't a cat. It was a man in a $3,000 suit, bleeding out into the mud, clutching a baby carrier, like it was the last life raft on the Titanic. He looked up at her eyes, fading, and whispered 3 words that changed her life forever. Don't call 911. The neon sign of Jerry's 24-hour diner buzzed with an irritating hum that felt like it was drilling directly into Sophie's temples. It was 200 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of dead hour where the only customers were truckers, fueled by caffeine and regret, and college kids sobering up over greasy hash browns. Sophie wiped the counter, her movements mechanical. She was 24, but she felt 50. Her feet throbbed in her worn-out sneakers. Knockoff Converse she'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. She was 2 months behind on tuition for her nursing program at St. Luke's, and 3 days late on rent. The tips tonight had been abysmal. She had exactly $42 in her pocket. Sophie. "Stop daydreaming and take the trash out," Jerry barked from the kitchen window. He was a man composed entirely of grease stains and bad attitude. "Going, Jerry," Sophie sighed. She grabbed the heavy black bags, the smell of stale coffee and onions wafting up to assault her nose. She kicked the back door open. The storm had been raging for hours, transforming the alleyway into a river of sludge. The rain hit her instantly, soaking her thin uniform. She hefted the bags into the dumpster, the metal lid clanging shut like a prison door. She turned to go back inside, desperate for the warmth of the kitchen, when she heard it, a thin, high-pitched wail. Sophie froze. It was coming from the shadows behind the stack of old wooden pallets Jerry refused to throw away. Her nursing instinct, the one that made her want to heal people even when she was exhausted, kicked in. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is someone there?" The wail came again, joined by a second identical cry. Sophie stepped around the pallets. The dim yellow light from the street lamp above flickered, illuminating a scene that made her blood run cold. A man was slumped against the brick wall. He was massive, broad shoulders, dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Sophie made in a year, a charcoal grey bespoke piece that was currently ruined by the dark, viscous stain spreading across his abdomen. But it was what was in his arms that stopped Sophie's heart. He was clutching a double baby carrier, sheltering 2 tiny infants from the freezing rain with his own body. "Oh my God!" Sophie gasped, rushing forward and dropping to her knees in the mud. Sir, can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered open. They were the color of steel, sharp and dangerous, even as they glazed over with shock. He gripped her wrist with surprising strength. His hand was freezing, but his gun, a matte black Sig Sauer, lying in the mud next to him, looked hot. "No. Cops," he rasped, coughing wetly. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. "Please, no cops." "You've been shot," Sophie said, her training taking over. She pressed her hands against the wound in his side, trying to stem the flow. "You need a hospital. You need trauma surgery." "No hospital." He gritted out, his teeth clenched in pain. "They'll find us. The twins. Please." Sophie looked down at the babies. They couldn't have been more than 6 months old. They were screaming, their faces red and wet with rain. If she called the police, social services would take the babies. If this man was a criminal, he'd go to jail. But if she left him here, he would die within the hour, and these babies would be orphans in an alleyway. She looked at the man's face. Despite the pain, there was a desperation in his eyes that wasn't for himself. It was for the children. "I'm a nursing student," Sophie said, making a split-second decision that terrified her. "My apartment is 2 blocks away. Can you stand?" "I can," he lied. He tried to push himself up and immediately groaned, falling back. Sophie grabbed his arm, slinging it over her shoulder. She was 5'4" and weighed 110 pounds, soaking wet. He was over 6 feet of solid muscle. "We have to move," she urged him. "Now." She grabbed the handle of the baby carrier with her free hand. "Jerry," she screamed back at the door. "I'm sick. I'm going home." She didn't wait for a response, dragging the stranger and his children. Sophie vanished into the rain-slicked darkness of the Chicago streets, leaving her safe, predictable life behind in the mud. Sophie's apartment was a shoebox on the 4th floor of a walk-up that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage. Getting the man up the stairs had been a nightmare. By the time they crashed through her door, Sophie's muscles were screaming, and the man was on the verge of unconsciousness. She dumped him onto her small, lumpy sofa. He groaned, his head lolling back. "Don't die on me," she ordered, locking the door and engaging the deadbolt. She carefully set the baby carrier on the floor. The twins had stopped crying, lulled by the movement, but they were shivering. Sophie went into triage mode. She stripped off her wet uniform, throwing on an oversized t-shirt, and grabbed her medical kit. It wasn't much supplies she'd borrowed from the hospital during her clinical rotations: sterile gauze, saline, a suture kit lidocaine, and antibiotics. She knelt beside the man and cut open his expensive shirt. The bullet had entered just above his hip. "Through and through," she muttered, checking his back. "It missed the major organs, I think. But you've lost a lot of blood." The man's eyes opened again. He watched her, his gaze intense and unnerving. "Who are you, some?" "Sophie," she said, pouring saline over the wound. He hissed in pain, but didn't pull away. "I'm going to have to stitch this. I have lidocaine, but it's going to hurt." "Do it," he said. "Check. Leo and Mia first." "The babies?" Sophie asked. "Check them." It wasn't a request. It was a command. Sophie paused, wiping her bloody hands on a towel. She went to the carrier. The babies Leo and Mia were cold and hungry, but unharmed. She quickly changed their wet clothes, wrapping them in her warmest blankets. She found a can of emergency formula she kept ironically for when she couldn't afford real food for herself, and mixed 2 bottles. She propped the bottles up for them, watching as they drank greedily. "They're okay," Sophie said, returning to the man. "They're eating. Now it's your turn." For the next hour, the apartment was silent, except for the sound of rain against the window and the man's ragged breathing. Sophie worked with steady hands. She injected the lidocaine, cleaned the jagged edges of the wound, and began to stitch. "You have good hands," the man murmured. He was sweating profusely, his skin pale. "You have a bullet hole in your side," she retorted, tying off the final suture. "You're lucky the caliber wasn't higher. Who did this to you?" He looked at her, and for a second the mask slipped. She saw a deep, ancient exhaustion. "People who want what I have." "And what do you have?" He looked at the twins, sleeping soundly on the floor now. "Everything." He tried to sit up, but Sophie pushed him back down. "Don't. You need fluids. Drink this." She handed him a glass of water and 2 Tylenol useless for a gunshot wound. But it was all she had. "My name is Dominic," he said, taking the water. His hand brushed hers, sending a jolt of electricity through her that she hadn't expected. "Dominic," she repeated. It suited him. Strong, rigid. "Well, Dominic, you're stuck here until you can walk without bleeding out, and I have class in 4 hours. I have money," he said, reaching for his pocket. "I can pay you." "I don't want your money," Sophie snapped, though she desperately did. "I want to know that no one is going to come, kick down my door, and kill us all." "No one followed me," Dominic said, his voice hardening. "I made sure of that. The man who did this, he thinks I'm dead." "Who is he?" Dominic closed his eyes. "His name is Victor, and if he finds out I'm alive, he won't stop until he finishes the job." Sophie sat back on her heels, looking at the blood on her hands. She was harboring a fugitive, likely a criminal involved in a gang war. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But then she looked at Leo and Mia sleeping peacefully in her laundry basket, which she'd lined with pillows. And she looked at Dominic, a man who had taken a bullet to shield his children. "Get some sleep, Dominic," she whispered, grabbing a blanket and draping it over him. "You're safe here." She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the armchair by the window, clutching a kitchen knife, watching the street below. When morning came, sunlight streaming through the grime of the window, Sophie jerked awake. She had drifted off. Panic seized her. She looked at the sofa. It was empty. The blankets were folded neatly. The blood-stained shirt was gone. The baby carrier was gone. "Dominic," she called out, her heart sinking. Silence. She walked over to the small kitchen table. Sitting there was a thick envelope. Sophie opened it. Inside was a stack of $100 bills, at least $10,000. There was no note, no explanation, just the cash and the lingering scent of expensive cologne and copper blood. He was gone, and he had taken the twins. Sophie sat down, heavily clutching the money. She should have been relieved. The danger was gone. She could pay her tuition. She could pay her rent. But as she looked at the empty spot on the floor where the twins had slept, she felt a strange, hollow ache in her chest. She had saved his life, and he hadn't even said goodbye. 3 months had passed since the night of the storm. The $10,000 Dominic left had changed Sophie's immediate circumstances, but it hadn't changed her reality. She had paid off her tuition for the semester and cleared her mother's medical bills, but the money was gone as quickly as it had arrived. She was back to the grind, picking up extra shifts, though she had left Jerry's diner for a high-end catering company called Elite Events. The pay was better, but the clientele was worse. Tonight, she was working the floor at the grand opening of the Obsidian Lounge, an ultra-exclusive club on Chicago's Magnificent Mile. The room smelled of expensive perfume, Cuban cigars, and old money. Sophie balanced a tray of crystal champagne flutes, weaving through the crowd of socialites and politicians. "Watch it, sweetheart," a man slurred, bumping into her shoulder. Sophie steadied the tray just in time. "Apologies, sir." The man turned. He was young, handsome, in a slick, predatory way, and clearly drunk. This was Sebastian Volkov, the son of a notorious real estate mogul with rumored ties to the Russian Bratva. He looked her up and down with a sneer that made Sophie's skin crawl. "You almost spilled that on my Armani," Sebastian spat, grabbing her wrist. "Do you know how much this suit costs more than your life?" "Please let go of my arm." Sophie said, her voice tight. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. I think you owe me an apology. Sebastian leered, pulling her closer. On your knees. The room went quiet. People were watching, but no one moved to help. That was the rule in this circle. You didn't interfere with the predators. Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked around desperately for her manager, but he was busy bowing to a senator in the corner. I said, Sebastian hissed, raising his hand as if to strike her, apologize. Sophie flinched, closing her eyes, bracing for the impact. But the blow never came. Instead, a hand large, tanned, and wearing a heavy gold signet ring shot out from the crowd and caught Sebastian's wrist in mid-air. I believe the lady asked you to let go. A deep baritone voice rumbled. It was a voice that vibrated through the floorboards. Sophie's eyes snapped open. Standing there looking like a dark god of vengeance was Dominic. He looked different than he had in her apartment. He wasn't bleeding or covered in mud. He was wearing a black tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. His hair was slicked back, revealing the sharp, brutal lines of his face. He radiated power, the kind of cold, hard authority that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. Sebastian looked at Dominic, and the color drained from his face instantly. The arrogance vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. Mr. Moretti, Sebastian stammered. I didn't know you were. I was just teaching the help a lesson. The help, Dominic repeated softly. He didn't let go of Sebastian's wrist. He squeezed. Sophie heard the sickening crunch of cartilage. Sebastian screamed, dropping to his knees, the very position he had tried to force Sophie into. This woman, Dominic said, his voice loud enough to carry across the silent room. Saved my life. If you touch her again, Sebastian, I won't break your wrist. I will break your entire lineage. He shoved Sebastian away. The young man scrambled backward, clutching his broken hand, and fled into the crowd without a word. Dominic turned to Sophie. His steel-grey eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment the terrifying Mafia Don vanished, and she saw the man from the alley. Hello, Sophie, he said. You... She breathed her tray, trembling in her hands. You're alive. Thanks to you, he said. He reached out and took the heavy tray from her hands, setting it on a nearby table with a careless crash of crystal. Shift's over. I can't just leave, Sophie protested, though her legs felt like jelly. My manager. Your manager works for me now, Dominic said calmly. He offered her his arm. Come with me. We have unfinished business. Dominic led her out the back exit, bypassing the paparazzi swarming the front. A sleek, armored black SUV was waiting in the alley. The same alley Sophie realized with a start where they had first met, though it looked different without the rain and the blood. A driver in a dark suit opened the door. Dominic gestured for her to get in. Where are we going? Sophie asked, hesitating. To my home, Dominic said. The twins miss you. That stopped her. The twins. How are they? Alive, Dominic said grimly. But not well. Sophie climbed into the car. The interior was lined with cream leather and smelled of cedarwood. Dominic got in beside her, and the car pulled away smoothly, merging into the Chicago traffic. I looked for you, Dominic said after a long silence. He was staring out the window. After that night. But it wasn't safe. Victor, the man who shot me. He was still hunting. I couldn't lead him to your door again. So you left me 10 grand and vanished, Sophie said, a mix of anger and relief bubbling up. Do you know how scared I was? I thought I'd be arrested for harboring a criminal. Dominic turned to her. The streetlights cast shadows across his face. I am a criminal, Sophie. I am the head of the Moretti crime family. The police don't arrest me because I own the police. Sophie swallowed hard. She had suspected, of course. The suit, the gun, the cash. But hearing it said out loud was different. She was sitting in a car with the most dangerous man in the city. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you, he said simply. The car slowed, turning off the highway and heading toward the exclusive estate district of Lake Forest. They approached a massive wrought iron gate flanked by security guards with assault rifles. The gate swung open, revealing a sprawling limestone mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. Leo and Mia, Dominic said, as the car came to a stop in the circular driveway. They won't stop crying. They've gone through 3 nannies in 2 months. They refuse to eat. They aren't sleeping. He looked at her, and the vulnerability was back. The only time they slept through the night was in your apartment in a laundry basket. The front doors opened, and they stepped into a foyer that was bigger than Sophie's entire apartment building. A stern-looking older woman in a housekeeper's uniform was waiting. Mr. Moretti, she said, looking frazzled. They're at it again. The girl won't take the bottle. Dominic looked at Sophie. Please. Sophie didn't think. She just followed the sound of the wailing. She ran up the grand marble staircase down a long hallway lined with oil paintings and burst into the nursery. It was a beautiful room, painted in soft pastels, filled with every toy imaginable. But in the center, 2 cribs were the source of the chaos. Leo and Mia were red-faced, screaming their lungs out. A terrified young nanny was trying to rock Mia, but the baby was arching her back, refusing comfort. Give her to me, Sophie said, dropping her purse. The nanny looked at Dominic, who had followed Sophie in. He nodded. Sophie took Mia into her arms. She smelled of expensive baby powder, but she felt tense and scared. Sophie hummed the same low, off-key tune she had hummed that night in the apartment, a lullaby her mother used to sing. She rocked Mia rhythmically, pressing the baby's ear against her chest so she could hear her heartbeat. Within seconds, Mia's screams turned to whimpers, then silence. Her little hand reached up and grabbed a lock of Sophie's hair, holding on tight. Sophie walked over to Leo's crib. He was still crying but watching his sister. Sophie reached down and stroked his cheek with her free hand. It's okay, little man. I'm here. Leo hiccuped, stared at her with big, watery eyes, and settled down. The silence in the room was deafening. Dominic stood in the doorway watching them. His expression was unreadable, but his shoulders, usually so tense, had dropped an inch. You have a magic touch, he said quietly. It's not magic, Sophie whispered, swaying gently with Mia. They're traumatized, Dominic. Babies feel stress just like adults. They need consistency. They need safety. They have safety, Dominic said, gesturing to the security cameras in the corner of the room. This house is a fortress. This house is a museum, Sophie corrected. They need warmth. Dominic walked into the room. He stopped a foot away from her. The air between them crackled with that same electricity from the first night. Then give it to them, Dominic said. Work for me, Sophie. Live here. Be their nanny. Be their nurse. Sophie looked down at Mia, who was already falling asleep. I can't. I have school. I have a life. I'll pay for private tutors. I'll pay off your loans. I'll give you 20,000 a month, Dominic said. Dominic. And, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper, I will protect you. Sebastian Volkov is petty and vindictive. He won't forget what happened tonight. Out there, you're a target. In here, You're untouchable." Sophie looked up at him. "Is that a job offer or a threat?" "It's a promise," Dominic said. "Victor, the man who shot me, he knows someone helped me that night. He's looking for a mystery woman. If he finds you before I secure my position—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Sophie looked at the babies. She looked at the man who was both a monster and a father. She realized she had walked into the alley that rainy night and never really walked out. "I need one condition," Sophie said. "Name it." "I'm not just the help," she said, channeling a bravery she didn't feel. "If I'm raising your children, Dominic, you don't order me around. We are partners in this nursery. Outside that door, you're the boss. In here I am." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Dominic's face. It made him look devastatingly handsome. "Deal," he said. Life in the Moretti estate was a paradox. It was the most comfortable Sophie had ever been, yet she had never felt more on edge. Her room was a suite larger than the entire diner she used to work in, filled with silk sheets and fresh flowers daily. The twins, Leo and Mia, were thriving. Their cheeks were filling out their laughter, echoing through the once silent halls. But the house was a cage. Guards patrolled the perimeter with Rottweilers. Drones buzzed silently overhead at night. And Dominic was a ghost. He would appear in the nursery late at night watching Sophie rock the babies, his expression unreadable, before disappearing into his study to command his empire. 2 weeks into her stay, Sophie began to notice things. Small things. A door left ajar that she had closed. The smell of cigarette smoke in the nursery hallway, despite the strict no-smoking rule. It came to a head on a Tuesday afternoon. Sophie was in the kitchen preparing a pureed vegetable mash for the twins. The staff usually handled the cooking, but Sophie insisted on making the baby food herself. It was one of the few things she could control. Mrs. Higgins, the stern housekeeper who had greeted her that first night, was chopping carrots nearby. "You coddle them," Mrs. Higgins said, not looking up. Her knife slammed against the cutting board with unnecessary force. "Mr. Moretti needs heirs, not soft children." "They are babies, Mrs. Higgins," Sophie replied coolly. "They need love, not boot camp." She turned to grab the salt from the pantry. When she turned back, she saw it. Just a flicker of movement. Mrs. Higgins's hand hovering over the pot of steaming mash, a small glass vial in her palm. A drop of clear liquid fell into the food. Time seemed to slow down. Sophie's nursing instincts, the ones that trained her to spot a subtle change in a patient's vitals, screamed at her. "Stop!" Sophie lunged. She didn't think. She grabbed the boiling pot of vegetable mash and shoved it off the counter. It crashed onto the tiled floor, splattering hot orange puree everywhere, including onto Mrs. Higgins's apron. "You clumsy fool!" Mrs. Higgins shrieked, jumping back. "Look what you've done!" "What did you put in it?" Sophie demanded, her voice shaking but loud. She backed away, positioning herself between the woman and the nursery door. "Don't be ridiculous. It was seasoning." "It was a vial," Sophie said. "Show me your pockets, now." "I take orders from Mr. Moretti, not the hired help," Mrs. Higgins sneered. Her hand dipped into her apron pocket. Sophie grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the drying rack. "Take your hand out of your pocket slowly." The kitchen door burst open. Dominic stood there, his suit jacket off his sleeves rolled up, revealing tattooed forearms. 2 guards were behind him. He looked from the shattered pot on the floor to Sophie, wielding a frying pan, and finally to Mrs. Higgins. "What is happening?" Dominic's voice was low, a rumble of thunder before the strike. "She's crazy, sir," Mrs. Higgins cried, playing the victim. "She attacked me. She threw the food on the floor. She poisoned it," Sophie said. Her eyes locked on Dominic. "I saw her drop liquid from a vial into the twins' food." Dominic went very still. He walked over to the mess on the floor. He dipped his finger into the cooling mash, not to taste it, but to smell it. He brought it to his nose and sniffed. Bitter almonds. Cyanide. He looked up. The temperature in the room dropped to 0. "Bruno," Dominic said to his head of security, "check her pockets." Mrs. Higgins tried to run, but she was an old woman against armed guards. Bruno restrained her, easily reaching into her apron. He pulled out a small, empty glass vial. "Victor sends his regards," Mrs. Higgins spat, her facade crumbling into pure hatred. "He pays better than you, Dominic, and he promised me retirement in the Cayman Islands." Dominic walked up to her. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He was terrifyingly calm. "You held my children when they were born," he said softly. "You have worked for my family for 20 years. And for 20 years I was invisible," she hissed. Dominic nodded to the guards. "Take her to the basement. I want to know exactly how Victor contacted her, how much she was paid, and what other fail-safes she set up in my house. Do not let her die until she speaks." As they dragged the screaming woman away, Dominic turned to Sophie. He looked at the skillet she was still clutching, then at her trembling hands. He closed the distance between them and gently took the heavy pan from her grip. He took her hands in his. "You saved them again," he whispered. I just saw it," Sophie stammered. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her knees weak. "Is she? Are you going to kill her?" "She tried to murder my children, Sophie," Dominic said, his eyes hard as flint. "Karma is coming for her, and it will be hard, and it will be slow." He pulled her into his chest. For the first time, Sophie didn't pull away. She buried her face in his shirt, smelling the scent of cedar and danger, and realized with a terrifying clarity that she wasn't just the nanny anymore. She was part of the war. The betrayal of Mrs. Higgins changed everything. The house went into total lockdown. All staff were fired and replaced with men Dominic trusted with his life. But the biggest change was in Dominic himself. He wouldn't let Sophie out of his sight. 3 days after the incident, he walked into the nursery holding a garment bag. "Put this on," he said. Sophie looked up from the storybook she was reading to Leo. "What is it? A dress? We are going out." "I can't go out," Sophie argued. "The babies. My sister Julia is flying in from Italy to watch them. She is the only other person on this earth I trust." "She arrived an hour ago," Dominic said. "Tonight is the simplistic annual gala for the Chicago Business Association. It's a front for the families to meet on neutral ground. Victor will be there." "And you want to go?" Sophie asked, incredulous, "after he tried to poison your kids." "I have to go," Dominic corrected. "If I don't show my face, I look weak. If I look weak, the sharks circle. I need to show them that the Moretti family is unbreakable." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "And I need you to be on my arm." "Me, why?" "Because the rumor on the street is that I'm wounded, vulnerable, and alone. I need to show them I have a future. I need to show them I have a queen." Sophie stood up. "You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" Dominic looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her messy bun and sweatpants. "No. I want you to be my fiancé." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. Inside sat a diamond the size of a quail egg, surrounded by sapphires. It was heavy, ancient, and undeniably real. "This was my mother's," he said. "Wear it tonight, play the part, and tomorrow I will wire $5 million into an offshore account for you. You can leave Disappear Start over anywhere in the world." Sophie looked at the ring, then at Dominic. The money meant freedom. It meant safety. But looking at him, she realized she didn't want to disappear. She wanted to see him win. "I don't want the money," Sophie said, taking the box. "But if I do this, you owe me." "Anything," Dominic vowed. "You have to survive," she said. 2 hours later, Sophie transformed. The dress was a midnight blue silk gown that hugged every curve with a slit that went up to her thigh. Her hair was cascaded in loose waves, and the massive ring weighed heavy on her hand. When she walked down the stairs, Dominic was waiting at the bottom. He stopped checking his watch. He stopped breathing for a second. "Breathtaking," he murmured as she reached him. He offered her his arm. "Are you ready to walk into the lion's den?" "Sophie, as long as the lions don't bite," she replied, gripping his arm tightly. "If they try," Dominic said, patting the bulge of the holster beneath his tuxedo jacket, "I'll pull their teeth out." The gala was held at the Art Institute of Chicago. It was a sea of black ties, diamonds, and forced smiles. As Dominic and Sophie entered the room, went silent. The music didn't stop, but the conversation did. All eyes were on the reclusive Mafia Don and the stunning woman on his arm. They moved through the crowd, Dominic introducing her simply as "My Sophie." The power move was subtle but effective. He wasn't hiding her. He was parading her. Then the crowd parted. A man walked toward them. He looked like a twisted reflection of Dominic, same height, same broad shoulders. But where Dominic was stone, this man was ice. He had a jagged scar running down his cheek and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was Victor. "Brother," Victor said, opening his arms wide, "I heard you were dead. I was so distraught I almost ordered a wreath." "Save your money, Victor," Dominic said, his voice level. "You'll need it for your legal defense funds, or your funeral." Victor laughed, a dry, rasping sound. His eyes slid to Sophie. He licked his lips. "And who is this another stray cat you picked up?" Victor sneered. "You always did have a soft spot for charity cases." Sophie felt Dominic's muscles coil beneath his suit. He was about to snap. She squeezed his arm, stepping forward. "I'm the woman who is going to be raising your nieces and nephews," Sophie said, her voice clear and projecting to the nearby listeners. "Since you seem so incapable of family loyalty, someone has to teach them what honor looks like." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. No one spoke to Victor like that. Victor's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed. "You have a sharp tongue, girl. Be careful you don't cut your own throat with it." "I'm a nurse," Sophie countered, holding up her hand so the massive diamond caught the light blinding him. "I know how to stop the bleeding. Do you?" Dominic let out a low, dark chuckle. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. "You heard the Lady Victor," Dominic said. "Back off, or I'll finish what our father started when he cut you out of the will." Victor's face turned purple with rage. He stepped closer, dropping his voice so only they could hear. "Enjoy your night, Dominic. Enjoy your whore. Because by midnight, this city will be mine. And that house will be a tomb." "Is that a threat?" Dominic asked. "It's a spoiler," Victor whispered. Suddenly the lights in the massive hall flickered and died. The emergency alarms began to blare. The heavy steel security doors slammed shut, sealing the exits. Screams erupted from the crowd. "It's a trap!" Dominic shouted over the noise, drawing his gun. He pushed Sophie behind him. "He locked us in!" "Dominic!" Sophie yelled, pointing to the balcony above them. Men in tactical gear and gas masks were rappelling down from the ceiling skylights, weapons drawn. "Get down!" Dominic roared, tackling Sophie to the floor, just as the first hail of bullets shattered the champagne tower next to them. The gala was over. The war had begun. The Grand Hall of the Art Institute of Chicago was a masterpiece of opulence. Under the vaulted ceilings, the city's elite mingled like sharks in a gold-plated tank. The air was thick with the scent of Chanel No. 5 roasted duck and the subtle metallic tang of fear. Sophie stood by Dominic's side, her hand resting on the crook of his arm. Through the fabric of his tuxedo, his muscles were hard as stone, coiled and ready to strike. She scanned the room, her eyes darting over the sea of faces. She saw senators who had appeared on the news just that morning, tech moguls who owned half of Silicon Valley, and socialites whose only job was to be seen. But beneath the glamour, the atmosphere was brittle. The music, a live string quartet playing Vivaldi, felt too loud, too frantic. "Something is wrong," Sophie whispered, leaning in close to Dominic. "The waiters. They aren't serving drinks anymore. They're moving toward the exits." Dominic didn't look at her, but his grip on her hand tightened. "I know. Keep smiling, Sophie. Don't let them see you bleed before they even cut you." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the main entrance slammed shut with a boom that echoed like a gunshot. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The string quartet screeched to a halt. From the shadows of the upper mezzanine, a slow, rhythmic clapping began. Clap, clap, clap. A spotlight, usually reserved for illuminating priceless sculptures, swiveled sharply, cutting through the dim ambition of the room to highlight a figure standing on the balcony. It was Victor. He looked less like a man and more like a spectre. He was dressed in a white suit that stood out starkly against the darkness, a jagged scar running from his temple to his jawline. A souvenir from a childhood fight with Dominic that Sophie had only heard rumors about. He leaned over the railing, looking down at the hundreds of trapped guests with the bored expression of a cruel god. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor's voice boomed, amplified by a microphone he held casually in one hand. "I apologize for the interruption to your evening of hypocrisy and cheap champagne, but I'm afraid the party is over." He gestured with his free hand, and the sound of mechanical locks engaging on the side exits hissed through the silent hall. Click-clack. Click-clack. "Victor!" Dominic's voice cut through the air, powerful and commanding. He stepped forward, shielding Sophie with his body. "This is between us. Let these people go." Victor laughed, a dry, rasping sound that made Sophie's skin crawl. "Oh, little brother, you always were so sentimental. These people, they are witnesses, and tonight I'm not just killing you. I'm killing the legend of the Moretti family. I'm burning it all to the ground." Victor snapped his fingers. Glass shattered from the skylights above. Black ropes dropped from the ceiling, and men in full tactical gear rappelled down like saddles, their boots hitting the marble floor with heavy thuds. They were mercenaries, faceless behind gas masks, weapons raised. "Kill him," Victor commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "And bring me the girl." Chaos erupted. The room dissolved into a frenzy of screaming civilians. People in gowns and tuxedos scrambled over each other, overturning tables, diving behind ice sculptures and pillars. The deafening rat-a-tat-tat of automatic gunfire shredded the air. "Move!" Dominic roared, grabbing Sophie's waist and practically throwing her behind a massive pedestal supporting a bronze Roman gladiator. Bullets chipped the marble inches from Sophie's face, sending sharp dust into her eyes. She huddled on the floor, covering her head, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The noise was unbearable, a cacophony of shattering glass screams and the relentless pounding of gunfire. Dominic was not cowering. He was fighting. He moved with a terrifying fluid grace, popping out from behind the cover to fire 2 controlled shots from his handgun. 2 of the repelling mercenaries jerked and fell, their bodies tangling in their ropes, swaying grimly above the panic. "There are too many of them," Sophie screamed, looking at Dominic. He was reloading his movements, precise, mechanical. But she saw the sweat beading on his forehead. She saw the blood seeping through the shoulder of his tuxedo jacket, a graze he hadn't even flinched at. "He wants to box us in," Dominic gritted out, slamming a fresh magazine home. "He's got the high ground and he has the numbers. We can't win a firefight here." "So what do we do?" Sophie cried. Dominic looked at her. For a split second, the hard mask of the Mafia Don slipped, and she saw the man who had sat in her kitchen watching his children sleep. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black smartphone. "I knew he would try something," Dominic said, his voice urgent. "I didn't think he'd be insane enough to attack the Art Institute, but I prepared for a siege at the exits." "What is that?" "The perimeter doors," Dominic explained, pressing the phone into her trembling hands. "I had my team rig the emergency exits with localized C4 charges, not enough to bring the building down, but enough to blow the doors off their hinges and create a breach for my men outside." He looked into her eyes, gripping her shoulders hard. "I need to draw their fire. I'm going to run for the center island. When I move, every gun in this room will turn on me. That will give you 3 seconds. 3 seconds for what?" Sophie sobbed, clutching his lapel. "To unlock the phone and hit the red button. The code is the twins' birthday. Leo and Mia. You know it." "No." Sophie shook her head violently. "You'll be killed. You can't run out there. If I don't, we both die." Dominic said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "And if we die, Victor gets the twins. Do you understand? He will raise them to be monsters like him." The thought hit Sophie like a physical blow. Leo and Mia. Her babies. The ones she had nursed back to health. The ones who fell asleep holding her hair. Dominic kissed her then, hard, desperate a kiss that tasted of gunpowder and goodbye. "Be brave, Sophie," he whispered against her lips. Before she could scream, he broke cover. Dominic vaulted over the pedestal, sprinting into the open space of the grand hall, firing his weapon as he ran. "Over here, Victor!" he roared, his voice echoing over the gunfire. "Come and finish it." It worked. Like a pack of wolves spotting fresh meat, the mercenaries turned their weapons toward Dominic. The air sizzled with bullets. Dominic slid across the polished floor, taking cover behind an overturned catering table. But the wood was splintering under the hail of fire. He was pinned. He was trapped. Sophie looked at the phone in her hand. Her fingers were slippery with sweat and dust. She was shaking so badly she could barely see the screen. Time seemed to slow down. She could hear her own heartbeat thudding in her ears, drowning out the screams. She thought of the rainy alleyway. She thought of the nursery. She thought of Dominic's eyes. October 12th. She punched in the numbers. 1012. A large red button appeared on the screen. Detonate. Sophie closed her eyes and pressed it. Boom! The world turned white. The concussion wave was massive. The heavy steel emergency doors at the east and west ends of the hall didn't just open, they disintegrated. The explosion blew them inward, sending shrapnel flying and knocking the mercenaries off their feet. Through the smoke and dust, a new sound emerged. Not the chaotic spray of mercenary fire, but the disciplined, rhythmic thunder of heavy assault rifles. Clear move, clear. Through the breached doors, a dozen of Dominic's elite guards stormed in, led by Bruno. They were precision instruments of violence. They moved in a phalanx, sweeping the room. The tide of the battle turned in seconds. Victor's mercenaries, disoriented by the blast and caught in the open, fell one by one. On the balcony, Victor realized his trap had failed. His face twisted from arrogance to pure, unadulterated rage. He saw his men falling. He saw his victory slipping away. And then he saw Dominic. Dominic was hurt. He was rising from behind the shredded catering table, favoring his left leg, his gun empty. Victor didn't flee. He was too proud, too consumed by hatred. He pulled a silver Desert Eagle from his belt and vaulted over the balcony railing, landing on the ground floor with a heavy thud. He ignored the chaos around him, marching straight toward his unarmed brother. "It ends now," Victor screamed, raising the massive silver gun. "I will be the last Moretti standing." Dominic tried to move, but his leg gave out. He stumbled, falling to one knee. He looked up at the barrel of his brother's gun. There was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet acceptance. "Do it," Dominic spat. "And rot in hell." Victor cocked the hammer. "Ladies first, I'll send you to say hello to Mother." Sophie was still behind the pedestal. She saw it all happening in slow motion. The guards were too far away, engaging the last of the mercenaries. Bruno was shouting, running, but he wouldn't make it in time. Dominic was going to die. Sophie didn't think. The person she had been, the timid nursing student, the waitress who took orders, vanished. In her place was something else. A mother. A protector. A Moretti. Her eyes landed on a weapon lying on the floor a few feet away. A Glock 19 dropped by a fallen security guard. She lunged for it. The metal was cold and heavy in her hand. She had never fired a gun. She hated violence. But she hated the idea of a world without Dominic more. She scrambled out from behind the pedestal, raising the weapon with both hands. "Victor!" she screamed. It was a primal sound, tearing from her throat. Victor turned his eyes, widening in surprise, as he saw the girl in the ruined blue gown, pointing a gun at him. He paused, a cruel smirk touching his lips. "You," he sneered. "Go back to the kitchen, girl. You don't have the guts to—" Sophie didn't hesitate. She didn't aim for the head. She didn't aim for the heart. She aimed for the threat. She squeezed the trigger. Bang! The recoil kicked her arms up violently, jarring her shoulders. The sound was deafening, ringing in her ears. Victor's smirk vanished. His leg kicked out from under him as the bullet tore through his kneecap, shattering the bone. He collapsed to the floor with a high-pitched, gargling scream, clutching his ruined leg. The silver gun clattered across the marble floor, sliding out of reach. Dominic was on him in a heartbeat. Despite his own injuries, he lunged forward, kicking Victor flat onto his back. He loomed over his brother, his face a mask of dark fury. "My leg! She shot my leg!" Victor howled, writhing in agony. "That bitch shot me." Dominic looked back at Sophie. She was standing there, chest heaving, the gun still raised, smoke drifting from the barrel. She looked terrified, but she was standing tall. Dominic looked back down at Victor. "She missed," Dominic said coldly. "She was aiming for your head." "She's a waitress." Victor spat, blood bubbling on his lips. "She's nothing." "She is the mother of my children," Dominic growled. "And she is the queen of this city. You are the one who is nothing." Bruno and the guards reached them then, surrounding Victor with weapons drawn. The battle was over. The smoke began to clear, revealing the carnage of the ruined gala. Dominic limped over to Sophie. She dropped the gun as if it were burning hot. Her knees buckled, and she began to fall, the adrenaline crashing out of her system. Dominic caught her. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. He buried his face in her neck, and she felt something wet on her skin. Tears. The great Dominic Moretti was shaking. "I shot him," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "I shot a person, Dominic." "You saved us," Dominic murmured into her hair. "You saved everyone. You did what you had to do." He pulled back, framing her face with his large, rough hands. He wiped a smudge of soot from her cheek with his thumb. "I told you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I told you that you were a partner. Tonight you proved it. You aren't just a part of my world, Sophie. You are my world." "The twins," Sophie stammered. "Are safe," Dominic promised. "Victor is done. His men are done. It's over." He swept her up into his arms, ignoring the pain in his own body. He carried her past the stunned survivors, past the wreckage of their old lives, and toward the shattered exit where the cool night air of Chicago waited. "Let's go home," he said. "Our family is waiting." That is the story of how Sophie went from a struggling waitress to the queen of the Chicago underworld. It wasn't just about the money or the danger. It was about finding love in the darkest alleyways and realizing that sometimes the scariest monsters are just fathers fighting to protect their children. Sophie proved that you don't need a weapon to be strong. Sometimes you just need the courage to open your door to a stranger in the rain. What would you have done if you found Dominic in that alley? Would you have called 911, or would you have taken the risk like Sophie? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of hard karma, romance, and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next dramatic story. Thanks for watching.